tonight we are going to be sharing Pastor Spotlight, and I want to introduce our regional coordinator, Sam Taylor. He is the coordinator for the greater Boston region, and Sam's going to be our host for tonight, and I'm going to blend into the background, and Sam's going to take it away. So welcome, Sam. Glad to have you tonight.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you for all your remarkable skills organizing and putting this together. I'm really sincerely excited about this webinar tonight. The Brookville Bible Church in Holbrook, which is on the south side of the greater Boston region, a generation ago was a powerhouse church. It was one of the stronger churches in New England in terms of just winning people to Christ, baptizing people, growing. But as often happens, over decades of time, and the church went into decline. And a number of years ago, I was there on the very Sunday that they installed a new pastor, Shawn. And I have watched over the last few years how Shawn has been an instrument in God's hands to cause that once thriving church that was in a real tailspin. It was in a death spiral. In fact, they had been told that they were in a death spiral, and he has caused that, or he and the cooperation of his people and the skills of his team, they together have brought that church back to a point where it's thriving once again. They've got a great story to tell. And so let me just introduce Shawn, Pastor Shawn Keener, and his co-panelist, Carol Roman, who's a member of the Brookville Bible Church, and Dominic, Raffa, who is the associate pastor there. And Shawn, tell us a little bit more about Brookville Bible Church and about yourself and Carol and Dominic.
Yeah, so of course I'll let Carol and Dominic talk about themselves, but I'm not a New Englander. I'm from Pennsylvania, but we moved up here in 2015 to pastor Brookville Bible Church in Holbrook. I'm 48. My wife and Pam and I have 5 kids and 2 grandkids. I have a degree in organizational leadership, a doctorate in organizational leadership from Evangelical Seminary in Pennsylvania. And as Sam was already saying there, Brookville, about 3 years before I came, Brookville had a church consultant group come in, do an exhaustive analysis, and said, if you don't make drastic changes that we recommend here, you'll be dead in 3 years. And I think they were right. And anyway, so from that time, so that'd be about 2012. From that time to now, the church has, and I came in I came in after the first quarter of that. The church has gone through revitalization, and now I think we're really out of it. I think we're doing really well now, and totally revitalized by my standards, at least. Just to give you an idea, I know we don't usually look at these kind of numbers, but I know they might just help you get an idea grasp this what has happened at Brookville. In 2015, the budget was $275,000 and 110 people coming, 0 baptisms, I think, from what I know. And the budget now, today, is just a little bit more, not much more, 300,000. The attending is probably a little lower, around 90, but we have 6 baptisms. So it just gives you an idea of what, we'll talk a little bit more about what revitalization actually looks like, but it's not the same thing as church growth. In fact, about a third of the original people that were here when I was hired are still here. A lot of them have left. Our town's a small town, working poor, a lot of disabilities, right next to Brockton City. It's Brookville Bible Church has been here at this location for 155 years. And one other thing that I think is very indicative of revitalization, of successful revitalization, is that when I came in 2015, about 27% of the attenders were from a 2-mile radius around the church. And now as far as I can tell, that's up to about 72%. So it's quite a big difference of people that are really local to the church coming to the church. And I'll pass it off to Dom.
Yeah, so first off, I'm just honored to be here. Thank you guys so much. I'm kind of new to I'm newer in a sense to Brookville Bible Church. I've been on staff for 6 months as the associate pastor. So I'm over discipleship, I'm over our young adults and our youth. And God has been able to just kind of show me what being a part of this revitalization team has really taught me a lot of what it looks like to do church and how to do it differently. And for me, I've always had kind of a vision of what this looks like. I always tell Shawn, hey, like you and I were thinking about it, you just put it into words. And that's what's been so neat. I've had some experience being able to be a high school pastor and a young adults pastor in California, and then also in the Midwest. So what's neat is I'm able to bring these different perspectives over to New England. I was born in Vermont, so I would say I'm a New Englander in a sense, but then I had my father was in ministry, so we moved around a lot. So growing up in the church, seeing churches from different cultures has really given me a different perspective of what church is doing in America. And then how are we reaching youth? How are we reaching young adults? How are we reaching people? And are we really trying things that need to be done? Or are we just kind of going through church in the same old way, in the same old motion? Or is there a way to tear down some sacred cows that we have or traditions to be able to reach people for the lost? So I'm really big on that piece of youth, young adults, specifically bringing young adults together on the South Shore here. We have a thing called South Shore Gather. And when I'm speaking of South Shore, it's anything under the Boston greater area. And just these churches that will get together and we'll worship and we'll have some unity. And what I've seen in church revitalization is if you want to be revitalized, you have to live in unity with other churches as well to be able to have different ideas. So this is a beautiful thing that you guys got going on with BCNE and meeting together and hearing different perspectives. So I'm just excited to be able to be a part of the conversation and hang out with you all. Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol Roman, and I've been at the church for, 32 years or something like that, 33. And I guess my perspective is a little different because I've been here through all the different things of the last few decades that have gone on. And it's been good. It's been good. I've been on staff since 2015. Before that, lots of different ministry areas, mostly women's ministry. But I've done nursery and all the events and things that all of you have probably done. As far as my contribution to Nimble Church, that wasn't intended to be part of the book, but Shawn decided to put it in there, and I'm honored to be here and to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank all of you. We are so excited for your participation in the meeting tonight. And so listen, before we're talking about the experience of Brookville Bible Church, particularly in the context of New England, a kind of a postmodern culture that we're in, that really, frankly, the entire nation is heading in that direction, but maybe we're a little farther ahead of the curve in that. But and so we have this unique context, and as Dominic so beautifully expressed, you know, finding some ways to do things differently, to tear down some sacred cows and be effective. And you all are leading the way. You're finding a way forward in a way that fits the churches in New England. I love the fact, Shawn, that you said, I mean, I was ready for you to say, you know, now we're 3 times the size we are. We have $1 million budget. We baptized 50 people last year. But instead, so, you know, we baptized 6. Well, you know that I would say that most of our churches in New England will not baptize 6 people. And so for going from not baptizing anybody to 6 is huge. And so, but our churches can relate to your experience is what I'm trying to say. But before we get into you talking about this incredible book that you've recently written about the Brookville Bible Church story, okay? Before we get into that, I want you to tell us, Shawn, a little bit about what is revitalization and what is it not? Can you do that for us?
Yeah, so this is a very important point. And Sam, what you just mentioned about a lot of churches won't have any baptisms, that really gets to the heart of it. Revitalization is really about taking, it's about 2 different scenarios, but the main one is about taking, helping a church that is either plateaued or declining or about to die. Things are going the wrong direction, and making it come to life again with the same identity. The same church, just breathing it life back into it, making it come back to life again like its former days. Another situation where revitalization, the type of revitalization we're talking about, comes into play is if you have maybe a church that's growing very well and seems to be doing very well, but might be growing for the wrong reasons. Maybe it's quite shallow. And so what we're talking about with this kind of revitalization would be key to a church like that as well. But revitalization means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and we want to be very specific. Revitalization, the way you'll recognize an authentic, we call it, maybe just to differentiate a little bit, we say authentic revitalization, but an authentic revitalized church will be above anything else. The biggest indicator is an authentically revitalized church will focus on their backyard. They will be heart and soul invested in reaching the people in their zip code around them, doing anything they can to reach that zip code. They'll have a discipleship that is it's primarily active rather than class type of thing. It'll be spiritually deep, but it'll be very active. It'll have spiritually and relationally healthy leaders. Maybe they're not that way before they're revitalized, but they get there. It also, this is a key point. This is a sticking point for a lot of people. An authentically revitalized church will put a much greater priority on community relationships than over taking care of church members. Not that they don't take care of church members, but a much higher priority on community relationships.
Thank you, Shawn. Let's just continue this conversation. What about what revitalization is not? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and so this is kind of a long list. You'll see it in the notes that Sandy gives you afterwards. So I probably won't go through them all. But the reason this is not to be negative, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what revitalization is. And this long list of what it is not that you'll see in the notes afterwards, I think really helps to clarify it. So one thing it's not fast. Usually, by my estimation, usually takes about a whole 10 years.
10 years.
It's not church growth. It took 10 years here at Brookville. It's not church growth. The church usually gets a little smaller, as we said. It's not a formula. It's quite messy. It's not guaranteed. I talk about it like a very sick heart transplant patient who gets a heart transplant. They might survive. They're certainly going to die without the heart transplant. That's definite. They might survive with the transplant, but they might die because they're so weak. It's kind of like that. It's not all the other things you hear about. It is not, we are definitely not talking about restarting or reopening or church planting or merging. They all have their place, but those are not the things that we're talking about. It's not spiritual revival. So that might be a big change in your mental thinking for a lot of you. Spiritual revival is part of it, but that's really not the nut of what we're talking about with it. And along that line, it doesn't have much at all to do with good preaching or the pastor's charisma or money. It's one key point that you'll see in Nimble Church is when you talk about reaching your backyard, you're talking about being very missional. So being missional and good, clear governance in the church they go hand in hand. You really can't have one without the other, I maintain.
Okay, that's a great transition. And let me remind all of our participants what Sandy said at the outset. If you have some comments that you'd like to include in the conversation or questions, just use that chat screen and we'll see those. And Sandy will look for opportunities to insert those comments into the conversation. But I can't tell you how much I appreciated this book written by Shawn Keener. It is the Brookville Bible Church story of revitalization. So what he has to share is not just theory, but this is experiential, practical, experience that they have put into practice there in Holbrook, right here in New England. But it's surprised me how filled with pastoral and ministry and leadership wisdom that is so relevant to where we are, church leaders. So, Shawn, thank you for writing this. Carol, thank you for your contributions, and Dominic for your role in this. Walk us through it, Shawn. Give us the highlights. Tell us about the core message of this really remarkable book that you've written.
Yeah, so along that line, I would say that probably the first 5 or 6 years that I was here, a lot of people that I would talk to outside of the church, like in the revitalization world, they would say, hey, it's just theory. But now, 8 years later or 10 years later, depending on how you look at it, I think it really is proving out at Brookville, and it's an experiment and process. We're not the only ones doing it. I just wrote a book on it. There's other people doing it, but it's all experimental, people trying to figure out how it works. And also I want to say something about the heart of the whole thing. The heart of revitalization, like I said, can work in a church that's growing fast, but for the wrong reasons. But honestly, my heart behind the book is for those churches that are just dying, and they're going to die. And there's, as you have seen the stats, there's so many of them, way too many to count. And it's horrifying. And we all know 1 or 2 or 10 of them. And it just breaks our hearts. And every church like that, if they want to change bad enough, if the Holy Spirit, if they are, humble before the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit convicts them to change, revitalization is possible for every one of those churches. Every one of them can be saved. One of the things I say, though, is that change will never happen until the pain of staying where you are gets higher than the pain of the change. So I talk about a very key story in my book about this, about an oil platform. But if it's more painful in your mind and in your heart to make these changes that we talk about in Nimble Church than it is to just stay where you are and die, well, then you'll never change. It has to become, you have to get so fed up, so discontent with your church dying before these things are possible. But a quick summary of Nimble Church, I've already mentioned that missionality and good, clear governance, they go hand in hand. You really can't have one without the other. If you have very, very convoluted governance or unhealthy governance, that must be fixed, and we have a prescription for that. The church struggles so much with, does the church exist for the believer or for the unbeliever? Is taking care of our church body more important than evangelism? Is discipleship more important than evangelism or something like that? There's a little bit of a false dichotomy there, but what we talk about in Nimble Church is it has to be evangelism that is always given a priority. Because the bride and the bridegroom, as we see in Scripture, the only thing that it has to be something very powerful to keep the bride and the bridegroom apart for this long. And what that is that God is wanting more people to come to Him. So it's not that we're not supposed to be discipling and growing and being holy and all that, but that's actually a second priority. The overwhelming reason that we still exist on this earth and aren't raptured, the reason we exist as a church is to reach the lost and the dying. So that always has to take a higher precedence. And a main key of the church, of Nimble Church, is that what we see in the attractional church. This is a big topic, but let me just say, in the attractional church, usually you see words like gather, connect, serve. First, you get together as a church, then you get together in small groups, then you serve, which is usually serving in the church, like in the parking lot, or welcome or greeter or whatever. What needs to happen in a postmodern context, post-Christian context like ours, that has to be actually flipped on its head, where the highest priority is now serve. So it's serve, connect, gather now. Instead of gather, connect, serve, it's serve, connect, gather. And serve is actually redefined. Instead of serving the church on weekends, it's serving out in the community, building long-term relationships that God can use to bring people to share the gospel. We say we build bridges that will bear the weight of truth in the Holy Spirit's time, bridges of trust. that will bear the weight of truth in the Holy Spirit's time. So the most important thing now, by far, all your money, like the largest part of your money, your staff, your prayer, your concentration, your heart goes towards community relationships. Then you still have your connecting in smaller groups. And the last priority, it's not unimportant, but it is deprioritized, and that's the weekend gathering. So you put less into that and more into going out. And then we talk about how the historic church has an advantage over the church planter in New England, because New England values old and small and history. So the historic church actually in New England might be a better prescription in a lot of cases for what's wrong with New England than planting a church. Even though church planting is still good, I'm not saying that it doesn't have a place, but in New England culture, this kind of authentic revitalization of a historic church is probably more powerful than a new upstart church, a church planter would do.
Shawn, let's pause and get
Yeah.
some feedback from the participants. You've said so many profound things there, and I love the comment you said that I probably won't say it as articulately as you did, but that the pain of staying the same has to be greater than the pain of introducing change, or you never will change.
Right.
And I imagine that as a former pastor myself, and almost all my entire ministry has been in pastoral work, and the pain of not seeing people come to know Jesus was an intense pain. The pain of preaching your heart out and praying and trying to tweak the machinery to make everything just as good as it could be, and to no real evangelistic effect, that was painful, and so I just wonder what kind of pain pastors experience when year after year, the church is just slowly just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and they're working their heart out and they're praying, their heart out, and they're doing everything they know how to do, and nothing seems to be working. And that's a painful place to be. And so your book gives them some direction there. But look, I'm looking up here. Josh, Pastor Josh said here something about that. I read in a different revitalization book this week that sadly most people in churches would rather die than live if living requires substantive change. And so do you think that that's true? Do you encounter church members and leadership that just are too uncomfortable with change, and because of their unwillingness to change, the church does die? I mean, I think I know the answer to that question, that the answer is obviously yes. So what a tragedy that is.
It rips your heart out. I just talked to one this week. And it rips your heart out because it's Christ Church and our sister church, and they could be saved. It's really a heart thing. It's are we willing to give up anything? Craig Groeschel says something very edgy that comes to play in here. He says something like, we'll do anything short of sin to reach the lost. And really, that kind of, however you quibble about his words, it really gets to the heart of this. If you're willing to give up anything, your church preferences or anything like that, to reach the lost, that's when this kind of change happens. But most churches, sadly, can't get there.
Sandy, do you have some questions that have come up in the chat room that you feel would be relevant at this point?
Well, somebody is asking if you'd clarify further the role that revival or spiritual renewal has within the larger circle of revitalization. So can you say more about that?
So the larger circle of revitalization, that sounds to me like maybe workshops and seminars and books about revitalization. And so that's a very broad conversation. And so what I was saying earlier applies, where we're talking about something very specific here when we say authentic revitalization. With what we're talking about, with what I'm talking about with Nimble Church, spiritual renewal will happen through the process. In fact, when we talk about being missional, what we're really talking about is getting in the shoes of the people around us, taking the risk of really knowing them, seeing things from their perspective, seeing Jesus, seeing the church from their perspective, loving them that much to be in messy relationship with them. And that's where our missionality starts to grow. And when we start to get the heart of God for the lost around us, then spiritual renewal is going to happen. I just say that it's not about spiritual renewal because a lot of pastors I talk to think, well, if we just preach better sermons, if we just get more orthodox, if we just have a spiritual rekindling, that alone will revive our church. And that is really not true. Of course, the Holy Spirit can do anything, but it's a lot more technical than that.
Let me ask Carol, who's been a long-term member, who's done everything, filled so many different roles in the church. From your perspective, Carol, how do the members of the church who've been there for a long, long time, who have grown accustomed to a certain traditional way of doing things, has the introduction of new leadership structures, new emphases on the lost in the community rather than, maybe a little bit less of an emphasis on tweaking the internal operation? How unsettling has that been to the members? And what can you say to us about and to the pastors who are on board here to make it as palatable as they can? I mean, I think that's an important question. I think that's what holds back a lot of pastors, because they intuitively know this is going to rock the boat, and they may not survive, the changes. So speak to us about that from your perspective as being a member of the church.
At first, and this is before Shawn came, we had the assessment group CRM come in, and one of the elders, brought them to our attention. We had them come in, they talked to us. At first, everyone is, I guess we better do this. This is needed. And then when things are starting to be implemented, you start having a little bit of naysaying. You have, why are we looking at these books instead of the Bible? And we weren't doing that, but sometimes when people are upset, they just turn to anything they can think of as a reason to be against what's going on. But I have to say, I mean, it was a slow roll at first. So it didn't seem quite so dramatic. We did, speaking to that other question, the last one about the spiritual revival part, that group did come in and they did have us do what they called a sacred assembly. And we were asked to, go through a book and get our hearts right first. And so that really was one of the foundational things. And so I think people did start out with that kind of good attitude, but then it does kind of go downhill. And it is hard for people to, lose some of the ministries that they've had for years, because you have to trim them. You can't, if you're going to focus on the outside world and lead them to Christ, you can't have all your volunteers and all your monies and all your work going to the Sunday service or Us Four and No More all week long. And so it can be hard. And I think one of the things, if they can understand why, I think that helps. If they can understand why we need to do this, and it's just a practical thing. You only have so many people, you only have so much money. Where is it going? Is it going to the outside world so that we can lead them to Christ, or is it going to go to us and keep us comfortable and then we die? I don't know. Am I answering?
Yes, yeah, you're answering it very well. Beautiful. Thank you for that. Dominic, you want to make a contribution here? Dominic, you've been on staff there for less than a year. I think you said about 6 months now. So but this has been on your heart, something that you kind of have longed for in your previous ministry positions. And so what's it like now to be a part of a church that is actually living out? And as Shawn says, you're still experimenting with how this looks. But to be a part of a church that really has a passion and a heart for what you've longed to see in the church. So what's your experience been like?
Yeah, so I think like my passion for this kind of stuff, and it kind of really opened my eyes when my dad was in ministry in Indianapolis. He had to end up leaving a church because the church was dying and they just wanted to hold on to what they wanted to hold on to and closing its doors. And there's a piece in me where as a kid, I just didn't understand that this body of believers wouldn't move. You know, I think of like Romans when Paul's speaking about the Jews and he says, I wish myself accursed. You know, I wish I even hear Romans 9:3. For I could wish that I myself were accursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brothers, my kinsmen according to the flesh. And Paul, of course, speaking to the Jews in the sense, but speaking to the lost of like, what is our heart? You know, like, are we really just going to gather together every Sunday and we're going to sing the same songs? We're going to have the same people come. And being in California, it's a very big church culture out there to where it's, you know, you can open a church and thousands of people will come. The church I was serving at had 80 students in the youth group, which is about the size of these churches here, which is insane. 80 kids in the youth group. You know, our young adult group was thriving. We had 1,000 people in my church, and we were like the third largest in town. The other one had 4 or 5. And I'm seeing all these believers gather together, but then I'm seeing the city around them just, you know, fall to shreds. And, you know, they're getting people in the doors and stuff. But what I really started to notice and what I really started to love about this concept is, why do we keep saying, hey, come to church and hear the gospel, come to church and hear the gospel, when we've been introduced to the gospel and we should be equipped and be sent out. So when we look at our 3 C's that we have here specifically at Brookville, it's care, connect, and celebrate. And in this, when we're caring for people, when we're loving on people, man, we're able to develop a connection with them. And when we connect with these people in discipleship, or when we say, hey, come check out our small group, or hey, let's grab a coffee, then what we get to do when we care and when we celebrate as a church on Sundays, we get together and we talk about what God has done. We talk about what he's doing. And man, we see the new person that we met for coffee. We see, you know, the person that was at our all-town event, and we start to talk to them, man, now their family's coming. And it's those cool little W's, but it's more meaningful. And now it's not just a number. It is someone that we genuinely have a relationship with, and we want them to experience Christ in a deeper way. And what's cool about my discipleship job is now, like when we go through the revitalization process, again, we don't want to ignore the church in a sense of, hey, we're just always community, because as I'm saying, like if we're a tree here, our trunk needs to be strong so we can have farther outreach, so we can produce more fruit. And that's when I love to step in and just say, hey, you know, like let's be equipped, let's be built up, let's know theology, let's know who God is in a deeper way. And when you start to know him, you start to fall in love with him, and then you start to love who he loves, who he's trying to reach, and then it just kind of propels itself. So That's why I'm really excited about the Nimble Church aspect, and that it's in words.
Let me thank you, Dominic, for sharing that. I'm just thrilled by what you said. And we're so glad that you are a boomerang New Englander, born in Vermont, and now you're all the way you come back, because
Yeah.
we're grateful for your passion and your insight, and we want you to have a long, fruitful ministry here in New England with us. Listen, so the one component that we've been talking about here a lot, Shawn, is this: there needs to be a changing mindset and passion among the people to focus on the lost in your backyard, to invest money there, to put the attention and the energy there. But there needs, along with that, there's a equally important component to revitalization, and that you talk about that a lot in your book, about governance and streamlined governance. And so without that, in fact, you've got a comment here, I see, that missionality and governance are inseparable. You say that you really cannot have authentic revitalization without the right kind of governance. And I think that that's one reason you've actually titled your book Nimble Church. You want governance that empowers decisive action, and not deliberative, old committee structures where you deliberate something to death. And so can you speak to that component of revitalization, governance, and what should that look like? And what are some of the traditional structures that maybe need to be torn down and replaced with a new form of governance?
Yes. So I'm from an elder-led model kind of background. I think this can work just as easily in other kind of church polities, church governance structures, but it's especially good for elder-led model kind of church governance. But so Dom was saying about the tree trunk and the branches. A dying church will maybe not the pastor. I see some of you talking on here about how you're nodding your heads, you're agreeing with me about the community, reaching the community has to come first. But in a dying church, the people, what tends to happen is they just want to build a solid trunk, and they spend their entire lives building that solid trunk, but there's no branches or very little branches. It's all about so that's where discipleship makes them feel like they're being godly Christians and running a godly church. And but what has to happen is the pastor and leaders, they're there for a reason as leaders, and they need to get whatever it takes, move the church people to where they need to be. One of my favorite definitions of leadership, there's several that I love, but one is just simply moving people from here to there. And it brings to mind shepherding, which in pastoring, we usually think about like hospital visits or something. But really, good shepherding is moving the sheep to where they need to be safe and be the sheep that they're supposed to be. So what happens in revitalization is you've got to move your people, sometimes kind of through force, from their unhealthy fixations. Carol was talking about, she mentioned like prioritizing your money and your staff and stuff, and that's very important, but I don't want you to think it's mainly about that. Mainly what it is the mindset of your people. Getting your people, their mindset to understand that the people around the church are way more important than how well run their church service is. And so governance, I say you can't have missionality without good governance, because if you don't have good governance in place, like maybe a lot of us, we're Baptists, we come from congregationally vote-driven churches, congregational churches. So if we're elder-led, but we're really congregational decided on a lot of things. And a congregation deciding on something, that's not a very old, not a very biblical concept. It's kind of a democratic thing like we have in the United States here. But it's kind of a newer concept in churches, but it'll never arrive at a hard decision. A consensus of a whole bunch of people voting congregationally will never do a hard decision. And that's what revitalization takes. It takes a very painful decision to be made. And that's where church leadership is so important. Now, if you have church leadership that is confused, that nobody knows quite who's in authority over what, there's micromanagement, there's people who are in charge of all different things, and there's no real clear lines of authority, you might as well just be consensus driven. You're never going to make a hard decision that way either. So what you really need is clear governance where there's clear lines of authority, decisions can be made flexibly, quickly, nimbly, and that's what has to happen for revitalization and missionality to take root. And so I happened upon something called John Carver's policy governance a number of years ago, and you'll see it in Nimble Church. It fits, in my mind, it fits so nicely with the New Testament precedents of elder-led churches. In fact, I think it's a blessing. John Carver doesn't write biblically. He's probably not even a Christian. He tailors it in some sense to nonprofits and charitable organizations, but he definitely doesn't write to churches. But John Carver's policy governance really, Ted Hall has a book out there, you're focusing your church board, which brings it into a church realm. But John Carver's policy governance, it is a beautiful prescription. I'll be glad to talk to you about it and help you through it. But it's a beautiful prescription for fixing so many of the rubber stamping, or on the other end of things, micromanagement that often goes along with elder-led models in small churches that are trying to be biblical, but it just gets all messed up.
Now, is it difficult? And walk us through the process of moving toward a structure like that, because our leadership structures are sacred cows, whether it's a congregational system or whether it's an elder system, or a lot of our Baptist churches, we have kind of a lot of authority within the deacon board. And so we have these different systems. Sometimes the pastor is he wields all the authority and the gatekeeper of all decisions. And so there's all these different systems, but to get to this efficient, as you say, it's policy. What's the phrase again that you use?
John Carver's policy governance.
Policy governance, where the elders establish policies and they give the people in charge of ministries authority to make decisions. There's clear-cut, roles of authority there. So that's a radical change. All right. Getting there can be a minefield for pastors. Walk us through a little bit about what you've learned about how to move a church to change its leadership structure so radically so that they can be nimble in their decision making.
So probably the far and away the biggest biggest pitfall I've seen in this, to answer your question, is churches trying to do this halfway. It doesn't work halfway. It's got to be done the whole. You got to do the whole thing. Otherwise, it won't work. It's like a watch. Actually, Ted Hall in his book talks about that very thing. You can't work the watch missing one gear. It's got to be the whole. It's a system that works very well, and it works beautifully with a elder-led polity like we see in New Testament. I would mention in the first chapter in Nimble Church, I talk about how there really isn't a prescription from the New Testament for how a church should be led. There is some examples. There's not even really a strong precedent necessarily. There's nothing really in the New Testament that says this is how a church should be structured. So we're okay all being structured differently. The key is you have to have very clear lines of authority. And I know the elder-led churches I've been in throughout my life, I'm a PK, they desire to have accountability. That's a big word. We want to have accountability over the whole church. We're representing the people of the church. We want to have accountability over the pastor or whatever the case may be. When you understand this and put this into effect, there's no better way to have global, meaning complete. And I do mean that. I'm not blowing smoke. Complete accountability of everything that happens at your church without spending 4 hours in an elder board meeting. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about spending an hour and a half in an elder board meeting a month, and you still have complete accountability for the whole thing. It's a beautiful thing. So, Sam, I would say it's the chicken or the egg thing that I haven't quite figured out yet. If you have a church that suddenly, for whatever reason, has the heart of God and they're broken for the people around them, they need to get clear governance in place. They need to go through the hard work, and we can be happy to help you. We'd love to help you. They need to go through the hard work of getting clear governance, because that's what's going to help. That's what's going to that's what's going to make that heart for the lost around them turn into something that actually bears fruit in the long run. But one of the ways I think might work better is for a church to first get its governance clear and in place, because then the governance, it's kind of like the godly elders you see in Acts 15 or something. The governance can lead the church into missionality. So I think sometimes one comes first and the other comes first, but they're key to each other.
Thank you, Shawn. Sandy, do we have other questions that are relevant to introduce at this point?
No, I'm just seeing a lot of thumbs up, people really resonating with what Shawn's talking about.
Yeah, I'm 68 years old. I've been in church ministry my entire adult life, and this is such a relevant thing. I've just beat my head against a wall because of our churches that I pastored in my generation were just married to a inherently inefficient system of governance. And they were somehow convinced that it was the right biblical model I was not effective in changing the governance. Thankfully, the church that I pastored here in New England had made some sweeping changes, and it was much more efficient, and it was much more of a delight to serve in that context. So it's such a relevant issue that you bring up, and I'm glad that your book touches on that or deals with it so thoroughly.
And how about some practical, I just got a question in, Shawn, practical resources, what would you say a first step, for churches would be, and then recommend any resources that you can share.
Yeah, so this is what I'm about to say is not to draw attention to us. It's because it's really all I know to give you. I would say get the Nimble Church book and work through it with your leaders, or maybe hopefully even with lay people. It's written for lay and for leaders. And there's like discovery questions in it. I know a church near us recently who went through a 10-week study on the Nimble Church with all their leaders. And so I would say that'd be a big start. If you go to revitalizingchurches.com, that's our website for consulting with the Nimble Church concepts, and we'd be happy to help you. We have 3 different options on there, ranging from free to expensive, but basically do it yourself kind of thing will help you extensively. Sam was talking about how do you clean up your governance, and that is a very tricky process. I think it would probably most often be done best with a consultant, honestly. It'd be hard to do without one. But Amen. I would say, now, the other thing I would say is, if many of you have already received Nimble Church because you've registered for this, if you look into bibliography, there's quite a few excellent resources there. I wrote this book because I didn't see anything written on this specific authentic revitalization that I'm talking. It's kind of out there in the larger conversation in bits and pieces, but I wanted to collect it and put it in kind of a how-to manual in a way. And there's a lot of different conversations out there, but a lot of them I think really miss the mark. But you could look in the bibliography there and find a lot of the references I used and books I referred to.
Hey, Shawn, let's go to a kind of switch the conversation here in a new direction. You talked a lot about focusing on your backyard. What are some specific things that you've found that have helped the members at Brookville Bible Church and the church itself reconnect with the community? I mean, what are the kinds of things that a church can do? How do they go about, thinking outside of what happens inside the building on Sunday morning and thinking about connecting with lostness in the community? How do they do that? What does that look like? Give us some concrete, specific things that you've done and others are doing that really help to make that connection.
Carol, I'll think about it. I'll ask you in a second here, see if you have anything to say. I would say we've tried a lot of things over 8 years, and a lot of them haven't worked, but we keep on trying. We're desperate to crack this nut, to figure it out. There's a lot of people, like just in Holbrook, the majority of people in Holbrook have no interest in God or clue about the church. They don't have any maybe bad feeling about the church. It's just not even in their lives. They have so to break into their little worlds we're actually at Brookville. We're not actually after the people who are easy to get with a new ministry or a really cool church Christmas Eve or Easter gathering or a mailer. We're not going for those people. They can go to other churches. We want the people that are really hard to get, the people that are not low-hanging fruit, the people that's really hard to break into their world. And so we've tried a whole number of things to do that, and we just keep on trying and trying and trying. Carol, you have an idea of some of the things we've tried?
Well, at first we were encouraging people, because so many of them lived outside the town, to on Sundays, hey, go to the CVS across the street. Get to know some of the people who work there. They'll see you after a while, etc. Get your gas there that day. Find a new hairdresser in our town instead of yours. Those were were okay. And people really did actually try to do that. Even, it was hard making this change, but they really did try. But it was too casual of a connection, even though there were little connections made. What we found, and I'll just fast forward to what has been working, is the having things in the town that the town would like, not something we think the town needs. We don't pass out literature. We have like a cookout. The people from Georgia that came, this church from Georgia came, and they made that even more possible. Things like that the town wanted us to help clean up for their parade. We cleaned up for their parade. We did some work for the Council on Aging. And we work together with them. It's not about us, it's about them. We don't advertise ourselves. Sometimes we do things without even letting them know it was us. But word gets around, and your reputation gets going, and it's for the Lord. So I guess that's good.
The overarching key thing to remember about what Carol just said is the win. The supreme goal in everything you do in reaching out to the community must be relationships, and not short relationships, not relationships just to get them saved. It's got to be long-term, loving. I really care about you, even if you never trust in Jesus, just because Jesus loved me first and he wants me to love you. And loving means something very deep and messy. So it's got to always be about relationships and building long-term ones.
Shawn and Carol and Dominic, God bless you. Thank you for your ministry and for sharing your experience and your wisdom with our pastors and church leaders here in New England. And we just know that much more of this is going to occur as we go forward. So we're just so excited about what is happening at Brookville Bible Church. You guys are leading the way, and we thank you for that. Sandy, I want to turn it back over to you. You have some concluding comments that we'd like to hear.
Yep. But Shawn, before you go, there was a question, and maybe you kind of answered this in your last statement. Somebody wanted to know, how do you define success? In your revitalization model, is it the relationships, or would you define it in some other way?
Yeah, there's success. The way you see success is when everybody in your church is on board with prioritizing the lost over themselves, and their heart burns to reach out to them in whatever way they can. And they're with you on being part of these town cookouts, on building relationships, whether they're introverts or not. We're all rowing in the same direction of trying to build long-term relationships with people around us, whatever that looks like, so that they can come to know the hope and joy and fulfillment and peace and life in Jesus that we enjoy.
Great.
Real quick, I just want to say, do not, as I was talking with Shawn, because we're always trying to understand, like, should we put success with numbers or anything like that? You just can't have success with numbers of people coming through your door. You can't have success with, baptisms and all that. So I just want to throw that out there. Don't be discouraged in that as well. I just definitely think it's the mindset of the church, which is hard to quantify in a sense. But
yeah, our church got smaller, and we lost a lot of really good people who wanted to go row with another boat or with another church. That's fine. But now our church is a little smaller, but it is white hot. It is on fire, and everybody's on board, and everybody's building relationships, and people from the highways and byways, if you remember that parable, are coming to Christ. And it's the fringes of society. It's wonderful to see people who can't help us or do us any good. It's all these people coming to Christ, people who had no connection with Christ before, and it's just happening organically. And that's when revitalization has taken root.
Great. Well, good word. Thank you, Sam. This was a great webinar, Pastor Spotlight to start off with. Thank you again, Shawn, Dom, and Carol for your insight.